Hello, welcome back to Spotlight by the Intelligence. Today I have with me badatmath, aka Caleb Humphrey. How are you doing today, man?
Doing good. How about you?
I'm doing great. Just another Friday in paradise. It's Valentine's Day. What a great day to record an episode.
Oh man, the love is in the air.
Can you feel it? Listen, Caleb, I want to give you the opportunity here to introduce yourself. Can you tell me who you are and what you do?
Yeah. My name is Caleb Humphreys. I go by Bad at Math on Spotify and every other streaming service, and I make lo-fi, sort of like cinematic lo-fi, sometimes sleepy, but extremely melodic lo-fi, and guitar being the number one instrument that everything sort of like surrounds. I'm a drummer and a bassist and a guitarist and a mandolin player. Came up playing a lot of instruments, but for lo-fi, like really cinematic, really melodic guitar is my favorite thing to do.
How did you start working on that genre of music?
That's a funny. That's actually a pretty good story because 2020, we all got shut in. A lot of people jumped on lo-fi, but the reason it happened to me, my wife had started working from home, and she needed some music to listen to, and she has that kind of auditory problem with listening to lyrics and that type of thing. So she was already listening to classical, and I recommended some jazz playlists, and then I sort of put her on lo-fi hip hop. I don't know when I like came across it, like a million years ago, but I've always kind of listened to it. But anyway, I put her onto that, and she got really into it. And then one day she just kind of leaned back. We were sharing in an office at that point. She leaned back and looked at me and said, "You could do this." And I was like, I mean, maybe I'll look into that. I've up until that point, I was never very interested in production. I'd been in studios and recorded for people before, but I had never been super interested in doing my own production. I only did demos. So I spent probably most of 2020 learning production from guys like Will Hatton, Mondo Loops, Eldre, those dudes.
I,
And that's
I
kind of how I jumped into lo-fi.
Sorry to interrupt. I was going to say, when you name drop Mondo Loops, he's been a previous guest. I was going
Oh,
to say,
cool.
keep good company. Sorry, please
Yeah.
continue.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, he's a dude we all looked up to that guy, but he's one of the dudes that really got me into lo-fi period. Just because, growing up in the beginning of lo-fi, it was all like boom bap and like hip hop based and stuff like that. And I didn't really understand that it could be melodic and guitar centered and like cinematic until I ran into like people like Mondo Loops, Sleeper Main, those types of dudes. So yeah. So basically my wife is the one who was like, you could do this. And for some reason I believed her. So
I mean, seems like it paid off. I want to dig into that a little bit because, for the record, I have the same auditory problem as you described it, with lyrics really throwing me off. Like, as a musical dude, I cannot listen to too engaging of music as background noise, if you will, just because it sticks in my brain like an ice pick, and I forget what I'm doing. So I like this inspiration with your wife saying, like, hey, you play instruments, you're musically inclined, you could do this. Incredible. There's questions I want to ask here, but first I want to go back in time a little bit. You mentioned being a drummer and coming up doing bass and mandolin, playing all these instruments. What was your musical background like before the COVID lo-fi era?
I've been playing, I think I got my first instrument when I was like 10. I got a bass guitar. But I've been playing since I was a tween, and that would be because my brother was a musician, my dad was a musician, his dad was a musician, and his dad. So I'm probably like fourth generation guitar player. So it's kind of just in the family. Grew up playing bluegrass around my family, and then was in marching band and was the drum captain, got into jazz drums and that type of stuff. And then that's how I met my first band, was a guy I was in marching band with, and I played my first live gig. I want to say, I know I couldn't drive. I think I was 14 probably when I played my first bar gig. Tried to sneak a beer, that didn't work out. So been doing it a long time. And my brother and my dad, obviously, and my mother actually is a singer as well. So my family had a huge influence on that, and always were. There's instruments always laying around, so I could kind of just experiment with what I was interested in. I was the first drummer to come around, and that drove my parents crazy. But
I can imagine. We've had, I come from a bigger family, the oldest of 7, and we had a drum kit in the garage at one time, and it disappeared one night with no explanation. And I'm like, I get it. I really do. So it's interesting to hear from somebody who has such like a long lineage of musicians in the family. I'm a first generation musician, for example. Like, I guess it skipped a generation because my granddad taught me a little bit. Did you feel like playing bluegrass and like the musical, I hesitate to call it pressure, but more like influence, how do you feel like that impacted you? Were you expected to play an instrument from the day you were born?
No. As a matter of fact, my dad's sort of a terrible teacher. He has no patience. The day I asked for a bass guitar, they basically said no because they didn't think I would stick with it. And I do remember actually my parents sort of played a trick on me that year. They got my granddad to buy me a bass amp, and we went to their house for Christmas, and he surprised me with this bass amp. And I was like, what am I going to do with this bass amp? You guys told me I couldn't have a bass. And so they let me believe this for like a day or two before Santa Claus brought me the same PV bass I still record with right now. And then the next, like, I don't know, like 2 years later, they did a similar thing. I walked in Christmas morning. My brother had this like huge display of like CD players and like video games and stuff. And then over on my side, there was like a shirt or something. Like, it was really sad. So I was just sitting there like, oh, thank you so much. This is great. And they let me sit there for like 10 minutes before they walked me into a different room. And there was a drum set sitting there, used, beat up pawn shop drum set. But I was never really pushed towards it. My dad showed me one chord, threw me in a room, told me I couldn't come out until I could do that C shape. And he may have done that to push me to go learn on my own. And so I did. And I grew up, around friends who played. That was right around the time when I could, go to my friend's house, turn on dial up, look up a couple of tabs that were incorrect, and kind of started learning guitar at that point. But no, I was never pressured into it. It was always supported. My brother was around and would let me play with him, or I'd sit in with my family or play at church. But I've been interested since I was like a child, because I used to go to church with my family, and they would let me sit there and play a ukulele like quietly in the background while the choir was singing, that type of thing. I've always been interested. I would sit in church with my mom, and she would give me 2 pins, and I would play on her hands, play drums on her hands. So it's always just sort of been a natural thing for me.
I'd love to see it. I mean, it's, your parents sound so playfully sadistic with these little things. But it looked like it teed you up well to be self-motivated to learn, which I can relate to. I, as a guitar player, a career guitar player, or rather teacher, in fact, that came up on Guitar Hero. I learned from terrible internet tabs. I was actually playing them upside down for the first month until I understood that it had to be rotated. Here I am.
We were there at the same place, dude. I remember doing that. Yeah.
In my time doing the show, I've interviewed a lot of lo-fi artists, and what I've noticed is that they come from typically one of two sides, right? Is they're either previous band kids who come and learn the computer stuff later, or they're computer guys who learn the band stuff later. And so sounds to me like you fall into the band experience guy. I'm interested to know what kind of electronics do you use to record music with? Are you in a specific DAW?
Yeah, I record in Ableton. And that was like a decision based solely on the fact that most of the dudes I was watching on YouTube used it, and it made it learning easier. I think I did my first album dark part, I did that in GarageBand, like the free version. And then I moved into Ableton once I decided I was going to take it a little more seriously and wanted to learn more. I just go into a Focusrite like every poor musician does, with this microphone, working a lot of the Foley. I use an H4N Pro a lot of times to record background noise, that type of thing. I go direct in and usually record through the Corey Wong VST for my guitars and stuff like that, but I try to keep it really simple. I actually work in IT, so I do not want to do a whole lot of like complicated analog setup when I go to record. I just want to sit down and like start coming up with ideas, you know.
Nice. It sounds very organic. The as a fellow Ableton user, it has such an incredibly steep learning curve to it. It's like, I hands down best one I've ever come across, but I'm incredibly biased in saying so because I did not give the other ones a fair chance, because at that point I had sunk so much time into Ableton. It's this or die. You mentioned some of the plugins you used and like keeping it simple. Are there any other ones that you feel fall within that category of keep it simple, but also this is essential?
For me, Soothe 2 is essential. I sort of follow my mastering I learned from Mondo Loops. I actually constantly reference the same video that he did on mastering and mixing. And so probably that, actually I'll say Labs soft piano has probably been on, I don't know, 95% of my tracks. And I'm going in through this key lab back here, which was a gift. I'm not even much of a piano player, but I can fiddle around with chords and I know my scales because of marching band. Being in drumline, we had to learn our scales. But that I kind of keep kind of simple. And I usually use, I definitely don't want to load my computer down with a bunch of plugins. They can be sort of inspirational, but at the same time, I've found that half the time when I buy a plugin, I don't end up using it. I use it like once and then, you know, that's the end of it. Sometimes I do it offhand. Like, you know, I bought Breath Free the other day because I had one track that was having a lot of like noise from my guitar pickups and I wanted to clean that up. But I think I've used that one time. So I try to keep things simple. I try to get inspiration from, you know, starting with just a chord progression on piano or on guitar, or even just watching a video. You know, I mentioned Will Hatton, who's Hushchild, does tons of videos, and sometimes I'll see him talk about, you know, a method in Ableton, and I'll go try that, and that method will get me started on a track, you know. So I try to keep it simple just so that I can start with music first and not necessarily base it on a plugin or anything like that.
I think that's something that I've encountered a lot, is this reconnecting with more organic music, right? Because everything we listen to commercially now is like highly processed. And I say that's as somebody who listens to processed music. I wanted to ask more about what you described as cinematic lo-fi. So like for me, I'm not super familiar with all the intricacies of lo-fi genres coming from the EDM scene. That's a little bit more my cup of tea. So when you say cinematic lo-fi, is that a genre in and of itself, or is it just an adjective you use to describe yours?
It's sort of a niche. Yeah, I think there's a ton of niches that, like, I think playlisters like to put you in. And it took me a long time to really understand all of these, like sleepy lo-fi versus boom bap versus dusty. You know, there's all kinds of descriptor words to set you apart. I think there is a huge difference between traditional boom bap, which I do love in its own right, and what I do, which is more like lo-fi girl inspired type stuff. So cinematic, I think most people would agree that it's there's a lot of dynamics. There's a lot of up and down. It's very melodic, because a lot of people, you know, I'll get shot down from playlists a lot of times because I literally had someone say this sounds too much like a song. I think they meant to say it sounds too much like a singer-songwriter song, or like the layout, because I do that. I usually write songs with a really strong melody, and I keep that as a hook, and then I'll almost write it like a verse to put like a guitar solo or something like that. I'll put a bridge in, then I'll go back to that hook. So I write them in a way that in a method that's like writing singer-songwriter stuff, which is what I grew up doing before this. So cinematic, I think for me, it's basically like, if you took these hip hop drums out, would this sound pretty cool behind a movie or a TV show? It's kind of like what I think.
Thank you for the explanation, because I was going to ask what makes a track cinematic. I really like the story about getting rejected because it's too much of a classic singer-songwriter format. From my decade in teaching guitar, I started producing EDM with like almost like a verse, a pre-chorus, a chorus style setup. And then it occurred to me when I got in the DJing world, I was like, they kind of just do like they have their own unique arrangement style that lends itself to the way the music is played. And so like when people are like, do you have beats? I'm like, no, I have songs. Like I don't have 10 different tracks that are like a minute long of just like ambient music. It has like it has a start and end to it.
Right.
What I wanted to ask, I guess, is like, if I can commit the sin of asking an influencery question, what would you describe your brand as? Like you talked about being online and you talked about playlisting online and how you find these niches that are the most appropriate for your music. It's like, what does badatmath represent?
I think, I don't have visually, I don't have a great brand. I have a degree in advertising, so I probably should work on that. And that's something I'm sort of trying to develop, is visually something. But I think being in the lo-fi scene, people don't typically even pay attention to that most of the time. So I think my brand is mostly built around that idea that my songs are super melodic, and they're usually led by and based around electric guitar or acoustic guitar. And I usually record live bass, typically, that type of thing. I think sort of that raw, liminal, traditional recording feeling. I like, the thing I love about lo-fi is leaving in the mistakes and that type of thing. But I think my calling card, if anyone would recognize it, probably would be how melodic my songs are. They're so melody based. There's really not a lot of tracks that I've ever recorded where it's just like super simple keyboard, no melody, because a lot of playlisters do look for that, because a lot of people, even if you add in a really complicated melody, some people get distracted by that. And I understand that, totally fine. But I think similar to the artist Rebecca Mardall, she is a really great lo-fi guitar player. She bases her songs almost entirely on guitar. Like guitar is on throughout the entire track. That's not totally me, but I want people to listen to my music and think. I want them to listen to my lo-fi tracks and think they could add lyrics to it. Basically, it'd be that melodic. They could replace the guitar with lyrics, that kind of thing.
I like it. It's complex, orchestral, even. Could you tell me more about like what your start to finish process looks like when you conceive of an idea versus shooting out a final product? What happened in between?
Sure. Usually starts, on a good day, it'll start with me just laying down some chord progression on guitar or piano. Sometimes it'll start with, me working on just a beat with some drums. I'm working on getting an electric set in here so I can start actually playing some of my beats and starting there. But that's usually where it gets started. Or some days, like I said, I'll get inspired by something I see or something I hear. And I'll see if I can emulate just like a keyboard sound from some video or whatever. And that kind of gets me going. In between, I usually lay down, a really nice chord progression, and then I'll kind of loop that out. That won't necessarily be the final product, but I'll loop it out so I can base the rest of my arrangement off of that. I will usually record everything, drums, bass, everything, and then I'll lay out the arrangement, and then I'll record guitar last because I'm so familiar with it that that's where I'm like the most judgmental. Like, you know, I'm so bad at playing keyboards that I can just lay anything down and I don't really care that much. But playing guitar or playing bass, I'll spend, I don't know, man, like 5 hours just playing the same parts or comping the same parts in or whatever, just so I can get it kind of perfect or where I want it, or just to hit the like flavor or color that I want. But that's usually the last thing I do. And then I go back, mix and master. So it's a pretty standard thing. But I will say this, sometimes it starts in the weirdest place. Like I just got accepted onto this Dream Hop compilation, and they asked that we base the song on a certain track that was a reference track, and that our drums be inspired by paper sounds. So I started with the drums on that one. I started with like a snare that was me crumbling paper, and then a hi-hat that was me scribbling my pencil onto paper. And that's how I got that one started, and it built all from there, you know. So it's different each time, but usually I end the same way, which is putting guitar on and then mixing it.
Sure. So there's an efficient workflow built in with room for creative noodling, is what it sounds like to me. Yep. I wanted to mention specifically, I assume that you're active in the Discord community, right? That's something I found to be a staple of the lo-fi artists that I talk to. And I really, I'm sure you may have participated here and there in like beat battles, for example, or like musical face-offs that are centered around a theme. So Dream Hop putting this compilation album out revolving around paper sounds is just like incredibly interesting and unique creative challenge. I would love to hear that one. If I could wheel away from the music for a second, I wanted to ask more about your advertising degree. What was the purpose of that? And do you feel like it plays a role in how you promote your music online?
Yeah, I'm sure it does. I went to college. I had a couple of scholarships for music, and I turned those down because I didn't want to major in music. I had no interest in teaching. So I ended up sort of just going, and I started as an English major, just again, decided I didn't want to teach. So I jumped over to the communications department, which for a while I was in journalism was my what I was working on, and then I decided I wanted to make money someday, so I switched to advertising, and that's helped actually. Even being I've worked in IT for the past 13-14 years, something like that, and it's helped majorly there because I've ended up running the websites for the companies that I work for. I'm the marketing director for my current company as well, and I think it you know, as far as music is concerned, it's helped me to build a brand. It's helped me to understand that I've got to put money into making sure that people actually have an opportunity to listen to music. You know, a lot of people come in and they think, oh, you're submitting on Submit Hub, you're spending $50 on Submit Hub, you're just paying for plays or whatever. But what you're really paying for is access to people's ears, because if you're not guaranteed to get placed, even if you do spend $50 on Submit Hub, the music's still got to be good, and so I think that background really has like drove into my brain. You can't just be good. You have to be good and like get put into a spotlight where people can actually see and hear you at the same time. I think growing up as a younger player, and playing bar gigs and stuff, we just thought we'd play local bar gigs, and eventually further out people would see us play and we'd get bar gigs there and blah, 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 blah. I think we didn't totally understand that you have to find these ways for people to hear your music, So I think that has helped in that method. Yeah.
Definitely. I really like what you said about it's not enough to just be good. I've heard from other guests even that good music speaks for itself, but I mean, how can it speak if no one's around to hear it? Right. I really like people who take a business-minded approach to the way they distribute their music, because I feel like I have a lot to learn in that domain. And More specifically, I wanted to ask about your experiences with playlist submitting and Submit Hub. So, like, to give a little context, like I'm a Spotify playlister, right? I work for Lazy Pug. I listen to tons and tons of music a day. Pick the ones that go into, like our specific niche playlists and stuff like that. How did you find out about it? Why did you decide it was necessary? And what does that process look like for you now?
Man, how did I find out about Submit? I think, when I put my first record out, I had it ready to go probably for a month or two before I actually decided when I was going to release it and how I was going to do that. So I spent a couple of months just researching what I needed to do upon actually releasing the album. And I think that first album, I probably spent like $25 or something on Submit Hub because I didn't know how it operated. I didn't understand, like I said, the niches inside of lo-fi hip hop. So I was submitting this album to playlists that they did not belong on to. I was doing it completely incorrectly. I think up until recently, I've only started like understanding how to navigate specifically Submit Hub. I was just speaking to a guy that I did a collab with, Larkwood Falls. We've kind of been talking about this sort of marketing conversation that we're having right now, and he never really was super into putting a lot of money into Submit Hub, but we did this collaboration, and I threw a lot of money at it, and the song took off. And I think what a lot of people don't connect is that, sure, you'll submit to Submit Hub, you might end up on some great playlists, but after 30 days, those songs come off, right? Well, everybody thinks that's the end, but what you're really doing, you're triggering the algorithm. The algorithm learns where to place you. It learns, who belongs on your radio, all that kind of stuff. So it doesn't just end with those playlists. It really affects the algorithm long-term to where you get to the point where you can put a song out, not necessarily use Submit Hub, and Spotify might take off with it. Now, I don't really shoot for editorial playlists anymore because, I landed one a couple of years ago, but my goodness, they are really hard to land nowadays, and they're full of, I'll just say fake artists, especially in lo-fi. Spotify's getting really, really weird about their editorials. So I'll pitch to the editorials, but that's not a goal of mine anymore, especially you land one, you get a ton of streams, and then you drop, and I mean, it just feels like it's over when that drop happens. So, my goal and figuring out Submit Hub is really the end goal is for the algorithm to take over afterwards.
So it's like you're training an AI assist almost, in the sense of like each successful placement kind of calibrates you both as an artist and the algorithm as a means of vehicle to place you in these specific niches. Mm-hmm. I wanted to ask a little bit about, not specific to Submit Hub, but it could be, what do you think makes for the best chances of getting a placement in your experience?
I think knowing who to submit to, knowing where your music belongs. I think it goes without saying the songs need to be good, the production needs to be good. So, yeah, going past that, like we were saying with the niches, if I come out with a song that's like super guitar heavy, the tempo's really high, and it's like a really happy song, but I submit to a bunch of sleepy lo-fi playlists, I'm not going to get on any of them. There's some, and I've not with just Submit Hub, but with all the websites that I use, I usually put them into sections. And so if I come out with a song that's like super slow, super ambient, I could take a nap to this, I'm just going to submit to playlists that have that type of music. I think that's really the key. A lot of people go in blind and just submit to everybody, and sometimes I'll make the wrong decision, obviously, but a lot of people will just go in blind, submit to every single playlist, spend way too much money. But like, I'm going to tell you, like, don't waste 4 credits on a super slow, sleepy playlist if you just came out with like a banger that's like 140 beats per minute. You know what I mean?
Definitely. I really appreciate that concept of like a secondary organizational step, if you will.
Mhm.
Like you've got the music and it's done, right? But before it goes anywhere, it gets sorted into categories like this one's going here, this one's going here. I really think that's important to get across too, because like being on the other side of it, I hear many submissions that are great, objectively good music does not belong where we're trying to categorize it. And that's a tough thing to have to explain to people who, deserve the placement, just not here.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, and I'd rather hear that than a lot of times I'll get feedback that's like, I don't like the arrangement, or I don't, I don't really care if you like the arrangement. What I prefer to hear from curators is this doesn't fit my playlist, or it's just a little bit too fast for my audience. Because in the end, I want your audience to be happy as well, because again, that affects the algorithm for me. So when someone tells me it's just not the right song for the playlist, I totally get it. But if someone tells me it sounds too much like a song, I don't know what I don't know what to tell you.
well, so there's a little bit more I wanted to unpack. I apologize if this sounds too much like questions I already asked you, but I just wanted to, before we move on, ask you talked about tuning the algorithm. What other things have you noticed that help to calibrate the algorithm towards your best success? And with that in mind, what other marketing tactics have you learned from your real life career, so to speak, that apply to your music interests?
Sure. Collaborations are a huge thing. So if you do a collaboration with a bigger artist or a smaller artist, that puts you in the algorithm alongside of those artists and people who are interested in those artists. You end up on their radio, you end up on the same playlists with them. And so I think collabs are a big deal, and they're a big learning experience for production and for producers in general, because trying to work with another artist can be tough. But it can also be like a huge learning experience, just being able to produce someone else's music, that type of thing. So collabs, I think, putting yourself out there on the internet, saying yes to things like podcasts, or having links that go back to your website, having links that go back to your social media posts and on YouTube Shorts, blah 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 blah. Just having a web presence, because the more web presence you have, the more authority you have in Google search. I think there was a time where, if you Google badatmath, I was nowhere to be found. At least now, if you Google badatmath music or badatmath lo-fi, I'm most of the results. But that just kind of comes with what search engines call authority, which is, being around for a while and having a bunch of links that come back to your centralized brand.
Do you utilize such things to boost your SEO? Do you practice like targeted keywords and stuff like that? I guess I'm asking these questions as somebody who's vaguely familiar with online marketing, but never worked in a dedicated position for it. And so I'm wondering if being familiar with things like this concept of authority on Google gives you an edge when you put music out.
I'm sure it gives me a small edge. It's only something that I'm starting to really implement with this project with badatmath, because what I really wanted to do, my main concern when starting was to build up a catalog and have the catalog there. But now I'm starting to work on getting some SEO authority, and also working on building up my own playlist, so that when I have a new song, I add that playlist, and I'm getting streams for myself. And so I'll be running some meta ads and things like that for the playlist. But a guy who would be fantastic to talk to is a guy I just did a collaboration with. His artist name is Rui, and he has actually been in music marketing specifically for like, I don't know, 15, 20 years. And he worked in Nashville and worked with huge acts. And so we just did a hour-long call before we did our collaboration, and he like opened my eyes up to a ton of stuff I didn't even know about. Like, for instance, he landed a big Amazon editorial playlist, and he's one of the things he said is that what people overlook in Amazon is by filling out all the information, whatever they ask you to put in, a lot of people will skip that stuff over. And something that puts you at the top of the slush pile on Amazon is just actually answering all the questions, little things like that. But he's a dude who actually knows what he's talking about when it comes to specifically music marketing. Again, I'm just now starting to implement that. I don't really have anything to sell at this moment. I don't really want to sell merch until I would imagine it would actually make money. I don't think that's, viable for me. So right now, what I'm actually going to start concentrating on is building my playlist and getting the followers on that playlist built up.
So first off, one question. When you say Rui, are you talking like Rui.wav? Am I thinking of the...
I don't know if that's his... I don't know if that's his handle online or not. ROOEY. I don't know if that's his Instagram handle or not.
I mostly, so I was going to say, I think I know him from my preferred social media. So I am glad to hear that. Like, honestly, I love to hear that social connection.
That's him. Yeah.
In the background. Really, if you see this, I would love to have you on the show. Yeah, no, that's great. Honestly, I wanted to ask a little bit more about your experience with collaborating, because it is just so important. And I really love the perspective of like, it's not just about necessarily making a song with a person, but like after you've done that learning experience together, being the benefits you get algorithm style of being classified along with them, sharing audiences, things like that. I just think it's so vital. And so like with that, with respect to that, how did you pursue collaborations? Did they find you? Where do you go to find them? And like, what makes a good collaborator to you?
That's a great question. There's two major things I would say about that is it depends on where you're coming from. So if you are going to a bigger artist and you want to collaborate with them, my advice on that would be, one, make sure that the music you're creating fits that artist. I would say you need to approach them, have basically the layout of a full song. I've been approached by smaller artists and handed just a loop, and that's great. It's a good place to start, but that's like 15 minutes of the work. So try to have something really impressive. If you're going to go to a bigger artist and you think you guys would meld well together, try to have something pretty impressive that's ready to go, so that they don't have to like kill themselves to get a song laid out. If working with smaller artists, if you're in that seat where a smaller artist comes to you and wants to collaborate with you, try to bear in mind you were there at some point, and if they've got something good, that is like, it's like free. It's like, it just feels free to me. Like if someone sends me over a chord progression, that's like, I don't have to come up with that. Like that's one of the hardest things, getting a song started. So I love doing collabs. I would just say, if you're the smaller artist and you're going to a bigger one, think about it. Put a lot of time and effort into it. Research them, know their music, know that you would actually meld together, because I'm sure I've done this before, but I've been approached by smaller artists and it's just like not even close to my style of music. And there's not a lot I can do with that. I don't want to change my style to collab with a smaller artist, but I will say it is worth it. A lot of times, even if you're the bigger artist, it's great for your algorithm. It's great. Spotify will pick you up, help you out with that. And it's definitely, if you're the smaller artist like I am in a lot of these situations, it's just a huge boost to your streams and stuff. But don't go into it saying, with the idea that this is going to change your life, or you're doing this just to boost your streams. That's a benefit, but what you really want to do is make a really good song with somebody. So you need to find somebody you match up with.
Sure. Going into it with the right intentions is going to lead to the best product. It just makes sense. I was going to say that I really like the emphasis specifically on like what to do as a smaller artist, right? Because I don't like to practice musical elitism. Like it doesn't, like I don't walk around thinking like, oh, you're a medium-sized artist, you're a small artist. But I did hear previously, so I can't take credit for this, that if you were a smaller artist pursuing a bigger artist collab, it's nice to hand them off a song that's like sitting at 80% completion and letting them do the final touches on it. Because you think about it, it's like you're showing respect. You're giving them a
Mhm.
gift. Like, hey, I would love to do this thing with you, and I want it to be as easy for you as possible.
Yeah, and it's not even a, really it's not a matter of who's bigger or who's better necessarily. It's really that if you're approaching someone like, let's take Mondo Loops for instance, million he has 1 million monthly listeners, something like that. If you're approaching somebody like that, obviously they're constantly being approached about collabs, and so they may or may not even have time to listen to yours and may or may not have time to actually work on it. So yeah, you want to go to them with something that's solid, something that's basically a really great base for them to do the last 20% of the work, and do some great production, and just, yeah, I would give them the respect that they deserve. That's not me saying, hey, I'm this big artist, because I'm not. I'm one of the smaller ones. But if you're going to someone and you hope to benefit from them, and you will benefit from them, just bear in mind that they're probably constantly being approached by other people.
Most definitely. I wanted to say, where do you seek out your collaborations, or where do people tend to typically find you to ask you? And what do you think is appropriate conduct for, like both approaching and finalizing a collaborative project?
Sure. A lot of my collabs that I have actually set up have been on Discord. A couple of times, I think my first collaboration ever was with Hushchild. I was a big fan of his YouTube channel, and I want to say actually he was in a live, and I commented in his live, and he was like, "Hey, badatmath, reach out." Even in his live, he's like, "Reach out to me. I'd like to do a collab." He actually sort of initiated it, and then I just did a collab with VHS Kid. He's a big producer, on with Lo-Fi Girl, and we sort of had been chit chatting back and forth, and I think we both had a mutual respect, and we both knew that about each other, and so I reached out one day and I was like, "Hey man, we should work on something together. If you're interested, let me know, and I can get something prepared and sent out to you." And most of mine has been on Discord. I think being approached, I've been mostly approached on Instagram. And what's been most effective to me is if they just send me, a really good start to a track, with a really good recording, and if they give me free reign to do whatever I want to with it. The last two collabs I did, one with Rui, and one with Larkwood Falls, they actually approached me because I posted something. I can't even remember clearly. I think I maybe posted something on Threads, and I was asking, I was kind of in a spot where I wasn't feeling very creative, and I was like, producers, what do you do in this situation where you just have a little bit of writer's block, you're not feeling very creative, and a lot of people suggested a collab, and those two guys kind of reached out and they're like, here's some tracks, go play with them. That's how we ended up doing those collabs. So I think just approaching people respectfully on Instagram, being sure, don't just say you're a fan, like go listen to their music and see what they're interested in, see if your music melds together. And as long as you come respectfully and with something that's worth their time, then it should work out for you.
Beautiful. Yeah, no, I think a lot of people need to hear that. It's just like the extra foresight of, it's not just you making a track, but know who the track is going to, or the pre-track, if you will. I wanted to kind of deviate away from collaborations here and ask a little bit more about, like, who do you consider your greatest influences, artists that you actively listen to that you would say have contributed to your sound?
With outside of the genre, right now, I'm obsessed with McGee. I listen to that guy. I don't know. I was in the top 1% of his fans or something. Dijon, which comes along with McGee, and Bon Iver, who I saw live maybe last year, and ton of like influences outside of the genre. Everywhere from Bob Dylan to Bill Monroe to Stanley Clark to Jaco Pastorius. I mean, it's all over the place. But as far as within the genre, I think a lot of my biggest influencers have been the guys that I mentioned: Mondo Loops, Hushchild, Eldre, especially Eldre's drums and like sound design, Sleeper Main, a lot of lo-fi girl artists, but actually a lot of the artists that are in the Discord for Will Hatton, a lot of those dudes, it's for me, it seems more reasonable to kind of get some influence from the guys who are around the same size as you as far as monthly listeners, that do similar music to yourself. I like to listen to smaller artists to see what's up and coming, to see what's happening that's new. But I would say probably Mondo Loops. That dude, I just constantly watch his videos and have been listening to him for years. So.
It's interesting to me because I've really started to make appearances in person in my local music scene, and it's people do not really begin to register you as an artist until they see you consistently showing up in their domain. And the interesting part to me is that domain for the lo-fi community is Discord and the internet, and like YouTube lives and stuff like that. It's like it's not enough just to listen to the music, maybe even like exchange a few comments here and there, but like to actually be a part of the communities that they're in is to show up. It is to, quote unquote, attend a show for like an online friend. And so I really have nothing but good things to say about the lo-fi community. They seem so friendly and welcoming. And for you to have, worked with these people in the genre that you describe as your inspiration is just like such a beautiful thing to me.
Yep.
I wanted to wheel over to your experience with like a little bit more of the corporate side of music stuff. Have you had any experiences with record labels that you'd care to speak on?
Yeah, sure. I've worked with some, no major labels, but I think recently worked with Bootleg Boy. That was a fantastic experience. They took care of everything for me. Cold Soda's another great label. And then some guys like Lo-Fi Stories who are up and coming and have some really interesting like ideas about, they put out a compilation where they set up collabs between people who were in different areas of the world just to make sure there's sort of like an interesting sound that came out of it. I think Bootleg Boy is one of my favorite labels just because of the type of lo-fi that they put out and support. And they've all been really good experiences. I would say this, that, there's an area where a label is helpful and there's an area where I just wouldn't bother, they're popping up all over the place. But sometimes I think it's easier for me to put out an indie release, maybe keep all that money, and do the marketing myself. But there's a point where you can't compete. When it comes to Cold Soda or Bootleg Boy, they've got access to such playlists that I can market it all day long and I would get nowhere near those streams. So to me, if you're looking at labels like that, it's totally worth it. If you're looking at labels like Lo-Fi Stories or Purity or some of these mid-level labels, I think the experience is worth it. So you deal with really cool people, you go through the experience of working with a label, you get placed on some playlists. It may not be like, it's not going to be Lo-Fi Girl level of streams, but you meet a ton of cool people, and like you said, a lot of this takes place on Discord. Even the labels are built on Discord, and so within those labels, they've got little communities of people and little pockets of people with special interests in certain things. And so I think it's great working with them, even if it's not going to like change your life. It's great to build community through those labels.
Most definitely. I think like a lot of people see label releases as a means to an end, but to me, they've almost started to take the shape of like potentially like a social tool, right? Like even just like, it almost seems like exchanging a song that, for the benefits of the song itself, but also for the connections of like knowing people within a label who know how to distribute this music and becoming friends with them, like making those social connections. And it's like, seems like a very like a mutual back scratching type of situation. I wanted to
Yep.
ask because you described situations in which a label maybe isn't as preferable as an indie release. What things does a label do for you or has done for you previously that you would say make the difference as to whether or not to submit to a label or not? And with that in mind, how do you submit to labels?
So one of the things I look for from a label is not just like a ton. I do want, obviously I want a ton of streams. That would be great, but I would like, support as far as like the artwork is concerned, as far as marketing is concerned. For instance, if we talk about me working with Bootleg Boy, they did the artwork, they set up the release. I did an EP with them, and they set up a waterfall type release where, I was releasing one song per week, and then at the end of the month, the whole EP came out. They set up like hype edit links for me, so I didn't have to do anything, which is, everyone's least favorite part of releasing a song is doing all that stuff. So that's what I kind of look for as far as the support is concerned, and also being there to answer questions. Like, I know a lot of these are part-time people, working on this stuff, but sometimes you can get a little ghosted by some of these labels. So I tend to work more with labels who are there for questions or are available to like talk about artwork or what direction you're going into. And the way that I've communicated with almost all those labels has been through Discord. I think with Bootleg Boy in particular, I reached out to him when I was still on Twitter. I'm no longer there, but I reached out to him on Twitter and sent him a couple of tracks, and he'd listened to them, and then I actually finished this EP, and he invited me over to their Discord. But with a lot of them, it's just kind of going through doing the research. There's actually within the lo-fi community, I'm just saying, man, we have probably the best community. Everybody helps everybody out. Within the lo-fi community, there's like an Excel spreadsheet of like all the labels or the labels that people use the most. There's an Excel spreadsheet that I actually can't think of who created it off the top of my head, but it's been making the rounds, and that's what everybody kind of works off of. And you find that label, if they're in your niche, if they're looking for, you make a sleepy lo-fi track and they do sleepy lo-fi, then maybe join their Discord if they have one, or just reach out to them. A lot of them don't have a Discord. A lot of them, you just have to like go to their website or know the right dude to get in touch with. For instance, Lo-Fi Girl, you can't really even access unless you're invited or you do a collab with somebody on Lo-Fi Girl.
It really just seems like, outside of that last little exclusive bit, like the exact opposite of the industry standard gatekeeping that you'd expect. Having this readily available spreadsheet to shoot around to all the homies and be like, hey, if you're making this, these would be good guys to submit to. It's just like the kind of open access benefits of having a great community. So yeah, I stand by that absolutely. Lost my train of thought. I guess if you had to point people to a body of work or a song that you made that you think most defines what badatmath is about, what would you like? What's your favorite piece of music that you've written, and what would you point people towards?
That's so funny because my wife just asked me that. She asked me what my favorite song was, and it's tough for me because I burned myself out. I don't tend to go back and listen to my own music because during the production process, you listen to the same thing over and over and over again, and also I can just be a little too judgmental of my own music. So going back and listening to it's kind of rough sometimes. But I would say that it's not my most recent release, but that EP that I released with Bootleg Boy, it's called All That I've Seen, probably is my favorite collection of work that I've put out. It was during a really, really difficult time that I was going through. I had some, family things going on. I was in the middle of buying a house and moving in, and I just had a ton of stuff going on. And so I put a lot of emotion into it, and I think you can go back and hear that in it. I don't know that I could say that confidently about all my music, but with that EP, you can go back and hear what I was going through almost. So yeah, that's called All That I Have Seen. It's an EP that I put out last year, I think.
Gorgeous. I'm excited to check it out. I love to see people translating, life stress and bad circumstances into this creative energy where you can pick up on what someone's going through, but it's not something ugly and destructive like many of our coping mechanisms nowadays.
Right. Yeah.
I have so thoroughly enjoyed this interview. I want to start bringing things to a close here. So I guess if I can be more general or broad here, if you were going to give advice to somebody who was in this smaller artist position that we talked about, what would you say is like some of the most important takeaways or most important like rules of thumb, guidelines, practices they could apply to do better?
Yeah. I think we covered quite a bit of it. I've given this speech a couple of times, but I think knowing your genre, knowing what you belong to, what playlist you fit, what record labels you should work with, what collaborators you should work with. I think knowing your style and kind of working on honing your style before, I think a lot of people say the numbers don't matter, and they definitely don't at the beginning. I would not pay attention to numbers or like the amount of money that you're making at the beginning, but I would pay attention to what are you trying to say? What is your style? What is your brand? When people hear you, are there hallmarks of your music that make you different from other people? And I think work that out. I think live in the community, make friends in the community. That's like one of the biggest things. Pay attention to what people are doing. And then again, like we were talking about early, give your music a platform. If you need to spend some cash to market your music, do it. I started by spending my own money, and now I spend the money that I make on music on marketing. And a lot of people don't put that. A lot of people don't treat it like a business, and that's not like super exciting. It doesn't feel creative, or like it doesn't feel like you're watching a music documentary or a movie, and it's not super inspiring. But all those dudes that you look up to treat it like a business. If you get to a point where you're making a little bit of cash on music, put it right back into equipment or back into marketing, or but really it's just as simple as giving yourself a stage. Even if it's online, give yourself a stage where people have the possibility of hearing your music. You can't just stick something on Spotify and think it's going to like take off. It's just never, I don't care who you are, that's not going to happen unless you're Tom York or from Radiohead. Yeah, he can do that. But so pay attention, make friends, be in the community, be a part of it. It doesn't have to be your entire life, but you're going to get what you put into it. So put effort, put money, whatever you got to do. And definitely at the beginning, don't pay attention to numbers because it don't matter. I literally, when I started, my goal was to get 1,000 streams. That was my goal. I think right now I have 90,000 monthly listeners. So I bypassed the 1,000 streams goal, and that's cool to be realistic and to bypass a goal. But like, once you get, a method going, once you get to the point where you're constantly putting music out, those numbers don't matter anymore. I said I think, because I try not to pay too much attention to my monthly listeners or how many streams I've had overall. I don't think it's that important. I think it is important to pay attention to a little bit because you want to know that people are interested. You want to know that people like the last thing you did or didn't like the last thing you did. So, if I notice that I don't get accepted onto a lot of playlists with a recent song, then maybe that's not the style that people are into. So just pay attention, be a part of the community, that type of thing.
Thank you so much, Caleb. I wanted to know what's next for you. Where do you see the future of Badatmath, and how can people get in touch with you and find you?
I am going to keep doing the same thing I'm doing. I am working on a new EP, possibly an album. That is probably my next biggest goal, is just finishing, hopefully an album this year and getting that put out. If you want to find me, look on I'm on Spotify. I'm on all the streaming platforms, but I'm also on TikTok, Instagram. I think it's badatmath lofi on any of the social media platforms, but that's on Spotify, badatmath with a period.
Thanks so much. We're going to go ahead and wrap up here. I really appreciate your time and the wisdom that you offered. I look forward to maybe getting in touch with you again.
Thanks so much, man.
Take it easy, Caleb. It was a pleasure.
You too.